You are watching The View from Hampton U, exploring Hampton University's rich history, the past, present, and promising future.
Welcome to a very special edition of The View from Hampton U. I'm your host, Stephanie Sutton. Joining me today, we have Dr. Valerie Harvey from the Hampton University Skin of Color Research Institute and Dr. Kimberly Salkey from EVMS. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So first of all, we want to thank you all for joining us today because we're going to talk about a very exciting and special topic. Now, let's go ahead and start off with what is the Hampton University Skin of Color Research Institute, or HUSCRI?
Okay, well, HUSCRI is a basic science research laboratory that's dedicated to studying the causes of skin diseases that disproportionately affect minorities. So some of those skin diseases could include post-inflammatory hyperpigmentation. There's also studies going on keloids, which is a particular type of scarring that we see in African Americans, Hispanics, and Asians.
How important is an institute like this to not only the Hampton Roads area, but I mean in general for African Americans?
I think it's very important because there's no other institution like this in the country that's dedicated exclusively to looking at these disorders on the basic science or the laboratory level. And so these studies are important because they help us design treatments that are more effective and eventually help patients.
Now, what's your position at HUSCRI?
So I'm one of the co-directors of the Institute. I do more of a lot of administrative work, but I also do clinical work. We do have a scientific director, and she's the one who designs all the research studies.
Now, going along with a lot of the research that you all do, dermatology plays a huge role in the Skin of Color Institute. I know with many African Americans having skin issues. Dr. Salkey, talk about what you do at EVMS and how it relates to HUSCRI.
Sure. One of the conditions that Dr. Harvey could have mentioned under things that affect African Americans and things that we don't have adequate treatments for are hair loss. And that's my clinical interest. So I see a lot of patients with hair and scalp disorders, and many of them are African American women that are affected by a particular type of hair loss that seems to be specific to us as a population. It's something that we don't have great treatments for, and so places like HUSCRI, where research is being done to try to figure out causes, are really important to us to help figure out better treatments for patients too.
Now, what are some of the main causes of hair loss in the African American community?
That's a great question. It may be $1 million question and one for researchers to look into. There are a lot of different theories that have gone into it. We know that as African American women, there are a lot of things that we do to our hair that other people don't. So things like chemical relaxers, things like tight hairstyles, braids and weaves, that sort of thing have all been blamed, but no one's been able to make a direct connection between those things. And so we wonder if there may be a genetic component or something on a molecular or basic science level that may make people more susceptible, and then subsequently they develop hair loss. So
now, in doing these researches at your institute, how do you get people comfortable in even talking about these things? Because, you know, in the African American community, some of these subjects, you know, we might not want to talk about or touch on.
Right. So at HUSCRI currently, we're not actually seeing patients. We're doing more laboratory level experiments, but the hope is that one day we will be able to extend our studies for clinical trials so that we can actually test treatments in patients. People are interested in talking about what's going on. It's just that there's not been much interest in, I believe, the larger community. You know, there are those of us who are interested in learning about these conditions, like Dr. Salkey and myself, but on the whole, it's been a minority. So getting people to talk about it, you know, physicians and patients alike, I think will help move the cause forward.
Right. And one of the things you all are researching at HUSCRI is PIH. Talk about that.
Okay, so PIH, or post-inflammatory hyperpigmentation, is darkening of the skin, which happens as a result of injury. Could be any type of injury, or inflammation, could be any type of rash like acne or eczema. That can happen at any time, but it's more susceptible in people who have darker skin, like African Americans or Hispanics. The problem usually is that this post-inflammatory hyperpigmentation can take months, even years to fade, so it becomes a real issue in our darker skin patients because that really becomes what's more visible. we do have treatment options, but we don't have uniformly great treatment options that work for everyone. So HUSCRI, we're looking at some of the mechanisms behind post-inflammatory hyperpigmentation, and obviously the hope is that we eventually discover what is at the core so that we can design treatments that specifically target what's responsible for causing the PIH.
Okay. And I know it's very, very intricate and very detailed research, but talk about some of the ways that you all are doing this research. I mean, in the labs, how are these things being conducted?
Dr. Kadir, she's the scientific director at HUSCRI, as I mentioned before, and she's actually looking at the cells that are responsible for producing the PIH. Those cells are called melanocytes, and they secrete or make chemicals that are responsible for making the pigment that causes the PIH. If she can target at the basic level the markers or the molecules that are responsible, she can eventually block the formation of the post-inflammatory hyperpigmentation. Some of the treatments we have now block the enzymes or chemicals that are responsible, but they are not, as I said before, uniformly effective. So if we can find what that one key molecule is to block, then we may have more effective treatments that would translate to better outcomes for our patients.
Right. Dr. Salkey, when you have patients come in, do you see a lot of the PIH in your patients?
Sure, absolutely. And unfortunately, it's considered a cosmetic problem only by many insurance companies and even by peers and other people. And so the gravity of it, the impact that it has on people's lives isn't recognized by others. And some of the treatments that we have, Dr. Harvey already mentioned, are not especially adequate, and they can be expensive as well, which makes them difficult to acquire and to use for patients. So that's another reason why HUSCRI is so important, because if we could prevent something like PIH, that would be a fantastic way to cut it off at the pass instead of having to try to deal with it afterwards.
Right. Is there anything that people of color can do to prevent any of these diseases?
Not for the ones that we mentioned. Because we don't know the cause, we also don't know the risk factors, aside from post-inflammatory hyperpigmentation, where there's usually an obvious cause. But for keloids, sometimes they happen spontaneously or they happen after a surgical procedure. So there's really not that much you can do from that point, aside from avoiding elective procedures. If you know you have a family history of keloids, avoiding tattoos, piercings, those are kind of things that you can do to help prevent yourself from developing a keloid if you know you have a predisposition. But if it's your first episode, then we have not identified what those factors might be to pinpoint or at least alert people to say, hey, you might be at risk for keloids. Right. Ultimately, it would be great to be able to identify that person before they actually can develop that keloid and, prevent it from happening in the beginning.
We'll be back with more from Dr. Harvey and Dr. Salkey on The View from Hampton U.
Does your child like the arts? Does your child have a wild side too? Well, you have to bring your adventuresome child to the Virginia Zoo in Norfolk for the Arts Are Wild event on Saturday, May 3rd, 2014 from 11 a.m. till 4 p.m. Attendees will enjoy performances by young audiences of Virginia, activities at the literacy exploration stations, and they'll get to meet Cece Bell, children's author of Rabbit and Robot and Sock Monkey. And it'll all be topped off with a visit to the Virginia Animal Zoo. So come on down and let your child's imagination go wild. For more information, contact Young Audiences Arts for Learning Virginia at 757-466-7555 or visit our webpage at www.yav.org.
Welcome back to The View from Hampton U. I'm your host, Stephanie Sutton. In case you're just joining us, we are here with Dr. Valerie Harvey from the Hampton University Skin of Color Research Institute and Dr. Kimberly Salkey from EVMS. So ladies, we've had an insightful discussion thus far about the Skin of Color Research Institute and EVMS. Now let's talk about one of maybe your proudest accomplishments thus far from HUSCRI.
So I think my proudest accomplishment is helping build the Institute from the ground up. We started probably 4 years ago and just had an idea. It was just an idea that we wanted to look at skin diseases that disproportionately affected minorities. And we built it. We built the space. We recruited scientists. We recruited staff. And now we're actually producing data that we will eventually use to apply for large grants that will hopefully form the basis of new treatments that will advance our knowledge and also the care of our patients. So I'm proud of being here from the ground up, and I hope that HUSCRI will be around long after I am and continue to make contributions to science. So that's what I'm most proud of.
Now, whose idea was it to build HUSCRI here at Hampton?
It was actually Dr. William Harvey's idea. He had spoken to some friends and some colleagues, and they had been telling him, you know, with the shift in demographics that we're seeing in our country, you know, minorities eventually will become the new majority, and that there was not a lot of information and treatment options for diseases that we tend to see in our minority patients. And he was intrigued and interested, and he wanted to make an impact and make a difference.
Now, when you think of skin of color in a research institute, you can't help but think of dermatology and some of the issues that play a role in African American community. At EVMS, Dr. Salkey, what's your specific area of interest?
I have a special interest in patients with hair and scalp disorders, so I see patients of all ages and all ethnic backgrounds with hair loss. Since we're talking about skin of color, there are certain types of hair loss that I see far more frequently in African American patients in particular. I think by nature of the environment there, or the region where we are, we do have a good population of African American patients overall in our clinic, and I see a disproportionate number of African American women with a particular sort of type of hair loss called central centrifugal cicatricial alopecia. We mentioned it earlier and call it CCCA for short. It is one of those things that fits in that category that we mentioned earlier too, where we just don't know what the cause is, and we don't know if there may be a number of factors that all sort of contribute to developing it. I see some patients who have a family history of similar hair loss. I see some patients who have no history of hair loss whatsoever, so it leaves big clinical questions for us that hopefully on a basic science level we can understand better. Some of the things that I'm doing with my patients to help answer some of these questions are at least looking at hair care practices among patients who are affected by this disorder. So we're looking to see if they use chemicals in their hair, and if so, how often, and how early did they begin, and then other sorts of hairstyles. So tight hairstyles, things like hair weaves and braids, have been correlated somewhat with the development of this type of hair loss. Another avenue that's useful is educating hairstylists for a lot. In fact, there was a study done not too long ago that concluded that more African American women have a regular hairstylist than have a primary care provider who was identified. So
Included, no.
So using the stylist as a way to intervene and providing some education for them to help steer their clients to the doctor. You know, unfortunately, patients get a lot of the wrong information. Oh, it's just stress, or oh, you know, it was one bad relaxer, something like that, when really they may have a permanent process that once it gets to a certain level, can't be reversed at all. And so it's really important for patients to be aware of what's going on their hair and scalps, and come in as soon as something seems abnormal, because getting to these things sooner may be the difference between being able to creatively comb the hair and having to use something like a wig to cover the hair loss. So.
I'm so glad you touched on that, because I know a lot of African American women do use perms and chemicals and weaves and wigs. But what about some patients now? You know, there's been a big trend now with the natural hair movement and a lot of the holistic chemicals. I mean, do you see any correlation with the patients maybe who come in with the natural hair and using natural hair chemicals now?
There's sort of two sides to that. On the one hand, not using chemical relaxers is something that I advocate. I think when there are things causing hair loss and we don't know what they are, then the less you do to your hair, the better off you are. So if you can cut out anything that could possibly be contributing, then that's a good idea. Now that being said, and when I have patients who have a relaxer and they don't have a problem with hair loss, I don't have a problem with them. So I am not a hair, relaxer Nazi or anything like that. If you use a relaxer and you don't have a problem, then I don't have a problem either. But if you can live without it, then I encourage patients to do that. And sort of the other side to what you mentioned is natural products. And so there are lots and lots of natural products out there that have all sorts of claims, and patients buy hundreds and thousands of dollars worth of products, exactly, and they assume that things are safe just because they are labeled as natural. And so there are a lot of risks that go along with that, and unfortunately a lot of advertising that may not be completely true. And so patients end up spending a lot of money on a lot of products that may not do what they claim to do.
Yeah.
I think that's so important that you mentioned that, because African American women, the hair thing is a big deal. It's a big deal, and I think if people are better educated and doing things like you all are doing the research and educating our young women on this, it'll make it so much better. And speaking of getting them educated, how can people get involved with HUSCRI, whether it's students or community? How can people get involved with HUSCRI?
Students, Hampton students can get involved. We do have undergraduate students who do summer internships, and they get the research experience. They get to do hands-on laboratory experiments, and to see if they like it, to see if this is a field that they might want to go into, not just skin of color, but scientific research, being a scientist. And so I think that's a positive aspect. They get a lot more exposure than they would have gotten if HUSCRI wasn't there. In terms of people in the community, a couple of years back we did have a community forum where we invited a speaker from L'Oreal to come speak about some skincare products. We plan to do that sometime again in the near future. So as far as the community, if people are interested in donating to HUSCRI, which would contribute to funding scientific research projects, they can certainly go to our website and find out more information on how to do that.
Now, another way that people can get more educated on this subject is the Skin of Color Symposium. Let's talk about the symposium.
Sure. So the symposium, the Skin of Color Symposium, is geared towards physicians, physician's assistants, and physicians in training. We've had 3 so far. The first one was here in Hampton, and our most recent one was actually in Baltimore. And that's where when we gather experts from all over the nation. Our first one, we actually had an international panel, and we discussed some of these diseases that we were talking about. We identify gaps in what we know, and we talk about some of the latest treatment options. And it's a good forum for scientists and clinicians to get together and exchange ideas about these topics that we're interested in.
And I've had the opportunity to participate in some of the conferences and attend. And just at the last conference, I met up with a couple of other physicians who have similar interests to my own, and got some great ideas. And we have some projects that are going as a result of meeting at the conference. So definitely a great place to exchange ideas and collaborate.
And overall, what do you hope HUSCRI will accomplish? Like, what are the big long-term goals here?
Big goal, well, a pie in the sky goal is to uncover the etiology of keloids, of scarring. I think that would be a huge contribution, and to find an effective treatment so that we can help so many of our patients who are suffering from this very debilitating disorder. So that's my big pie in the sky. Also, we're looking at melanoma, which is a type of skin cancer, which doesn't happen very much in African Americans and Hispanics, but when we do develop this type of skin cancer, we're more likely to die from it. So what we want to do is identify what those factors are, if melanomas in minorities are more aggressive, and if so, how do you treat that? How do you approach it?
And what are some of your long-term goals with the state of dermatology and hair loss in African Americans?
Yeah, that central centrifugal cicatricial alopecia, again, affecting so many African American women, and something that causes scarring and permanent hair loss. So I would love to be able to figure out what the cause is so that patients can be counseled on how to prevent it.
Thank you, ladies, so much for joining us today, and thank you all for what you're doing for our community. I definitely learned a lot today. And thank you all for watching The View from Hampton U. For more information about today's topic, you can log on to www.huscri.org.
When I found out that I had prostate cancer, I thought it was the end of the world. My wife broke down and cried.
The Hampton University Proton Therapy Institute is treating prostate, breast, lung, pediatric, brain, and other cancers with the most precise form of radiation treatment available.
Proton therapy made it a wonderful life. It really did.
If you or a loved one has been diagnosed with cancer, call the Proton Therapy Institute at 877-251-6838.
Great day to be alive.
You're watching The View from Hampton U.
It's a wonderful feeling to be back at my home by the sea as the Assistant Provost for Technology. As a Hampton native, I grew up about 2 miles from the campus, so coming back is literally a homecoming. Having received my undergraduate and graduate degrees from Hampton University, I feel a great sense of pride and responsibility to provide the best leadership and strategic vision for current and future Hamptonians. As the Assistant Provost for Technology, I'm responsible for the Network Services team, the Web Development team, the Educational Delivery Specialist, the University Help Desk, and the Media Production staff. We provide services for wireless, we do troubleshooting for hardware, we stream video for events, we record commencement, etc., and those types of things that we want to have archived. And we provide services and maintain the university's webpage. I am a Hampton native, and I grew up less than 2 miles from the campus. So I am very familiar with the campus, and I consider this my home by the sea. I spent my undergraduate years here and majored in physics, and I also did my graduate years here as a condensed matter physics major in the master's program and a theoretical nuclear physics major in the PhD program. After graduating from Hampton, I went away to Howard University and I did a postdoctoral fellowship. But coming back has been almost as if I didn't leave in some aspects because a lot of my professors are still here. So it's feeling very comfortable. It's like being back at home, and also it's special because I get to serve my alma mater in a way that helps to uplift and enhance the experience of the current students and future Hamptonians to come. One of the initiatives that I have spearheaded, it's still in its infancy right now, but one of the things that's important to me is to launch the iTunes U site for Hampton University in the Apple Store. iTunes U is basically a free service that Apple provides for the academic environments in order to provide digital content online in the Apple Store that's downloadable by the entire world. And the good thing about that is that it provides a platform whereby we can market the university. Those few who have not heard of Hampton can become familiar with the university. You can see what types of things we've done or we do here through the ability to upload collections, for example, lecture series or special events, as well as course content. So a professor can create a course in the Apple Store under iTunes U and post digital content such as videos, etc., for viewing not only by their own students, but anyone in the world who wants to subscribe can view, download podcasts, video, audio, etc., and play those videos or audio on their iDevices or mobile device of choice. After we get faculty engagement and policy in place, we intend to do a launch. Not just a regular launch, we intend to launch iTunes U in the manner that is customary of Hampton.
The View from Hampton U, bringing you in-depth interviews, cutting-edge research, amazing sports highlights, faculty and student profiles, and much more.
I'm Stephanie Sutton.
And I'm Joseph Walters.
And you're watching The View from Hampton U.
Join us next week for another exciting episode of The View from Hampton U.